Hello, everybody, and welcome to Off the Rip here, an old podcast that I created a long time ago, and then didn't get a lot of traction, so I didn't do it anymore. And now we're back because we got things to talk about, at least for now. So we're going to use this format of I Hold Shift, of course. But with me, I've got three beautiful minds. I'm not going to say they're incredible minds, but they're at least beautiful by aesthetically looking at them. I've got Infinity Salvations Elite and Cam Allen. Infinity, of course, we know each other quite some time. Did a little bit of casting, I guess, at one point in time together out of the EU. Yep. Again, a guy very focused on the broadcast coverage side of Challengers. Tell the people who you are, what you're all about.
Hey, I'm Brody, aka Infinity. I've been casting Call of Duty for about 4 years now, and as you said, Alan, focusing on European challenges. Really, that's my whole shtick when it comes to this, and that's kind of the angle that I'll be looking through for this, discussion today.
Love that. And then, of course, directly underneath me, which is exactly where I want him, it's Salvations Elite.
I think where I deserve to be.
For your best of three, was I on the left side of you, or was I underneath you? I don't remember.
My right.
You're right?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't remember. But yeah, so if you guys don't know Salvations Elite, there's a lot of content creation in the Call of Duty scene. Very diversified channel, really great podcast called The Best of Three. Make sure you go check that out. But Salvations, please, talk to the people about yourself.
Hey. Thank you. I'm happy to be here. It's gonna be a fun one, but I mean, basically just doing content. I mean, I've worked with like Esports Engine MLG as like a ref for open bracket stuff, so I kind of been involved in that side of the scene. And then content. All this Rostermania news has been pristine. I couldn't be more excited, and I am excited to be here, to say the least. So,
well, it's good to have you. And then also joining us from across the pond, I've got Cam Allen, more of one of the how do I explain your mind? I'm more of like a managerial, analytical mind. You do a lot of stuff with statistics, and you have a really great spreadsheet that's listed out there for people that are looking for maybe a different look than what EasyMac normally brings to the table. But tell the people about you and what you've done in the last year.
I've gone from just posting scoreboards basically on Twitter, having like 0 to no followers, and just started posting stuff, and I ended up getting picked up by an amateur team this year just as an analyst, and hoping to try and make the step up to CDL into the next season. Yeah, so kind of just building up my brand and trying to push myself to the next level.
Really. Love that. Yeah, no, I know that you know this, but I used your statistics to kind of help me out with a couple of my videos, because it's got a much more comprehensive look at all the individual players.
Oh yeah.
Really, really good stuff. So yeah, it's the four of us, and how appropriate that there are 4 people in this podcast, and we're going to be getting 4v4 next year. It's like, this is the preset, this is the team, huh?
Look at this team, man.
We're going to run it up on these PB ladders.
We're going to do great. We're going to do great. So I want to start talking about that in specific, though. 5v5 to 4v4, the biggest thing we know is the fact that you're at least going to be losing one member. But the other thing about it is the fact that we are kind of getting word that all you have to have on your roster next year is 5 total players. So only one substitute is what you need. So not only are we going to lose 12 players from the roster spots from last year, but we're likely going to lose 24, likely closer to 30 going into next year, where I don't imagine we're going to see another Toronto Ultra move where you're picking up 18 million players to fill out your roster. Brody, I mean, take a look at that just really quick from the EU side of things, especially from Challengers POV. We were looking at like all of Team War players from the side of the Royal Ravens Academy or the Connect 5. You're talking about teams like Singularity, how they could be instantly picked up to next year. That doesn't occur now. There's no expansion teams that it's 4v4.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the key things, at least from this year, was that there were a number of players that should have and maybe would have been picked up by CDL rosters. We know of a couple of cases, such as Nasty for the London Royal Ravens. Those players would have been picked up if it wasn't for what happened with COVID-19. And going into the 2021 season, I think, before the news came out that we were going to 4 versus 4 and there wouldn't be an expansion in the 2021 year, I think, I was at least of the mind that a few of these players would be picked up. I mean, they have to be, right? You name some rosters there, Singularity, your War, your Connect 5, your Train Hard. These guys are so good. And there are so many talented players on these rosters that should have gone up to the CDL. That's not happening anymore. And that's not going to be a whole blanket case. There is a couple of cases that I do know of where there may be players making their way towards the CDL. But beyond that, it's going to be a case where these guys are going to get flanked by a whole new ton of players that might not be making the cut in the 2021 season.
It seemed weird, Josh. We had last year into this year where we've lost a lot of players that were pro players. They're now existing in the challenger scene. that's going to be almost times 3. That same sentiment going into this
Insane.
next year. Who do you kind of have your eye on as far as, who very well could be under threat of being dropped down, or maybe who might sneak their way back up after a good Challengers year?
Man, like it's like you talk about even the best teams having to cut one guy. It's like, are they gonna?
So tough.
It's gonna sift down the list and actually end up playing out. Like you look at Paris's roster, and you wonder how many of those guys are gonna get re-signed, and like who's gonna get sifted back in there. And you look at like, the Gorillas and the Rocker. You're wondering like what's gonna happen with those guys. Like there's legitimately insane amounts of players that could end up down there. Like we don't even know if Major Maniac's gonna find a squad at this point, and like he's been a stud, So it's just like unbelievable. Like there's guys like that you could potentially end up seeing signing like either like 2-way contracts or finding themselves on an open bracket team. It's just insane.
Now, Cam, the one thing that we do need to know about next year is the fact that there will be a little bit more of a looser format when it comes to how substitute players can play into challengers. Obviously, you kind of, stuck your way with Nasty throughout a lot of the year when there was discussion about him going to London. And obviously, with visa issues and COVID, he wasn't able to make that move happen. Do you think that we're going to see a lot more of that? Or do you think we're going to be sitting in the same ballpark where, you've got a couple of subs that'll play, but mostly everybody else will just be riding the bench?
I think it helps now that the teams can obviously have like up to, say if they have 2 subs, those subs can play on different Challengers teams now. So I think that's a big thing going into next year, is like a change from this year, because I think some of the subs probably didn't want to play with their other subs on Challengers teams. So I think that'll benefit.
Huge.
Obviously, EU might have another struggle year if there's no LAN events and it's all regional based and all of that. So the Americans, they might have a bit of an edge on the Europeans.
Shout out to the EU, man.
For real, dude.
They're going through the blender.
I think if it's possible, there should be a chance for, I would say, a few. Obviously, with there being no expansion in the league, it might be a bit more difficult. But I think there should be maybe a couple, if not 2 or 3, 4 players, maybe as subs on pro teams. But like you said, if teams only have to have 5 players on their roster, especially with trying to cut costs, teams might literally just stick to five players for all we know, or they might go 6. But more than that, can't really see it happening more than 2 subs, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I mean, we were kind of talking before we started up the show, like all of the things that just happened today and the implications. Arseny's likely going to the Atlanta phase. Major Maniac's gonna be sitting there like, oh, hold on a second here. What the? That's made AR's spot down. There's no way we see. I mean, we'll just kind of keep this free vote for now. There's no way we see a player like Major Maniac in Challengers, but we're gonna have that same sentiment on a lot of players. Like up until about an hour ago, we were thinking that Temp might be in the Challengers scene next year.
Well, if I'm honest, I think Major Maniac was the most integral part of that roster. I think
arguably,
the way that he played,
Route man gets paid.
The way he played was unnatural. He had like half the amount of engagements as the others did all year, and he literally just said to them, "Play like crackheads, and I'll just sit here and I'll pick up the scrap, and I'll sit in the hill and I'll rotate and I'll do all of this." While the other guys, I mean, Simp was dropping 50 bombs like
on a Zero Cave with an SMG.
Exactly, you can't be dropping 50 bombs without a guy, like placing you around the map almost. So.
It's mental.
It'd be a shame to see him not in the league, if I'm honest. He's a good player, him.
Yeah, so I mean, we all know that the Challengers year this year was met with a fair share of criticisms, but the one conversation point that I always kind of try to take people back to is if you compare year 1 of Call of Duty Challengers to year 1 of the Overwatch contender scene.
Yes.
Oh my God, dude. It's like the amount of money that was put in, the amount of events that were put through. Yeah, the broadcast coverage wasn't what we wanted initially, but even afterwards, we still got these major cups and an actual finals that was kind of perused throughout all the regions. Yeah. But as Josh, you had mentioned the fact that if EU's in the blender, where's APAC right now? I mean, with all of this stuff, I mean, if they're in if EU's in the blender, I mean, APAC has always been the scene that has kind of been like the forgotten stepson, right, of Call of Duty, where every now and again you'll get a success story. You've got your players like Dens that came through. You've got players like what is most of the Paris Legion from this last year with Luca and Shox, but the level of competition has never been good. So like, as we were kind of looking at the regional disparities between North America and Europe and APAC, what were kind of your biggest takeaways from last year, and how are you kind of looking for those to be maybe potentially remedied going into next year?
Man, I mean, how many straight did Renegades win? How many did it end
All
up
of them,
being?
just every single one.
18, I believe.
Yeah,
it was.
17 or 18, right?
Yeah.
And like what? They're gonna make less money than a 1v1 All-Star weekend?
Bro,
like
everyone at Challengers made less than the
Yeah.
players that won the city circuit by
City
individual
circuit.
payout. Yeah.
yeah, like, what?
It's not
Oh
even
my
Like,
much
we're out
fun,
there-
to
oh
be
my
honest.
word! Like
Yeah,
that's
let's not
what's
talk about that.
insane to me. You know,
Right.
it's like you have guys who are gonna get robbed in APAC who should be on teams, and we saw these guys succeed in the CWL when you had to qualify based off pro points and winning lands in the United States, and they were qualifying for the pro league at that point doing that, and they're getting left out of the scene now because of branding and because of not being the attractive personality the Americans want to watch. Like it's tough, man. I don't know what I would be doing right now if I was at APAC AM. I would feel about as discouraged as you could possibly feel right now. So
Mhm.
hopefully there's some more opportunities for them in the future, but it's going to be tough with like the format and how you include these guys in the next year or two.
The
I think for
online
the top
format
guys,
is so hard.
oh, go on.
Those are the
I
online
think for the
format.
top guys-
Go,
Go
you
on,
go,
Yusuf,
you go.
I'll go. I think with the top guys like Renegades and maybe is it Chiefs? Is that the other team?
Yeah, Chiefs.
Or what Mind Freak used to be,
Yeah,
or whoever it is.
Chiefs.
I think it's not awful for them because obviously, especially for Renegades, they're winning, they're making
Yeah,
money.
they're running it up.
They're,
Yeah,
they're making,
that's
they're
money
making money off that. But for the guys that are like really trying to get through, coming third, fourth, or whatever, it's so different for them compared to say like EU or NA because the EU and NA have more of a chance of getting picked up, into the next
Right.
year or at any point in the season. Whereas, and then those guys then go to the top. Those guys that were coming third or fourth, they're then someone like Afro, he suddenly just went straight to the top, being on that Team War team.
Mhm.
But those APAC guys finishing third and fourth, if those top guys aren't getting picked up, they're just going to stay at the top the whole
Right.
time. So there's no kind of elevation for those guys that are coming in third and fourth.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think one thing I would want to say though, in regards to sort of the APAC region, realistically speaking, even though there should be an opportunity for these guys to get picked up to the CDL later down the line, you kind of also have to compare them in power levels to the teams
Sure.
in Europe
For
and
sure.
North
Yeah.
America. It is hard, of course, because they don't get the same practice as you say. I mean, their practice is against teams that maybe aren't that great. I think Chiefs is realistically their only competition in that region, and even then, sometimes the games just aren't close. But when you start to compare Renegades with maybe Team War or Singularity from Europe, or teams like the Atlanta FaZe Academy from North America or Westar, I mean, they're in a different ballpark, in my opinion. But then again, we haven't seen enough of them in the 2020 season. I mean, we got to see the first launch weekend where Renegades placed top 6.
Right.
So, I mean, that's really the biggest tragedy, I think, for me of the 2020 season, as an aside, is the fact that we never got to see, outside of the launch weekend open and a couple of events where like Singularity were in America, I think it's like the Los Angeles Open, we never got to see the North Americans take on the Europeans or Renegades to see what damage they could do against these top teams. That's going to be the saddest thing. And it's actually one of the things that, for me, is kind of taking some stock away from Renegades. They just haven't even had the chance to take a shot at these top rosters.
It's tough, man. It's tough in this current world, in this current system, but we were talking about it for a moment, and I want to get back to the whole prize pool thing. Now, I would say you're on one of two sides of the fence here when it comes to the prize pool. Again, $1 million total to the whole cumulative year is insane. But of course, the one that's lingering in people's minds is the $500,000 that was dispersed between all three regions, and how even if you won in North America, you technically still came away with an individual take smaller than what the winners of the city circuit did, which I think rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And I think that you're on one of two sides of the fence here. Either number one, you're sitting there and you're looking at the fact that, hey, we paid out more players. Their ambition to go pro is going to be able to get elongated even a little bit because they made money from finishing top 24, even though, again, there was only 32 total squads. The other side of the fence is, I played all year long. I want to make more money. So I kind of want to get your takes as far as what side of the fence you're on. Because me personally, I'm on the fence that is, hey, I'm fine with paying out more at the end of the year, get more people a chance to end the year, go back to mom and dad and say, hey, I won money playing this game. Let me try to do this. That's actually healthier for the elongated period going into next year, in my opinion, for challengers next year, at least for North America. That's...
I don't know. the city circuit, right? I'll say this. The CDL has built themselves up on the free levels, like the community, challengers, and the pro, right? I mean, that's what the free levels of the CDL. The problem I think they've kind of backed themselves into a corner with is the city circuit exists, but as you say, I don't think it should ever be in a position where the players that are winning European challenges, for example, are earning less money individually than the people who win the city circuit.
To be fair, though, the way the city circuit was supposed to work was that it was supposed to be qualified at the home series event, and there wasn't actually a big prize pool associated with it until the end of the year. So if things were to have gone as planned, the challengers scene would have gotten a higher individual payout if everyone could have gotten to a final. So
yeah. But then don't change it. Like, that's the way I see it, right? I mean, it's all nice, it's all well and good. You're offering out that money and you're giving people exposure that otherwise wouldn't get it. Sure, it's nice, right? But to me, the way I think the prize pool was distributed this year wasn't correct in my mind. There are specific examples I would be pointing towards, and as an aside of this as well, I guess it's kind of a going off on a tangent, but for example, I think top 20 teams getting a prize pool at champs, it shouldn't be happening. There are players here that are barely earning salary at the top of their game in challenges. Yeah, it sucks, but they are being cornered into that position, and they should not be having prize money taken away from them for other competitions. It's tight as it is, and I get it. From there's always stats behind the scenes. There'll always be some kind of, the city circuit is bringing in this much exposure for the Call of Duty League. It works, and that's fair enough. But I think it sucks like hell for these players that are screaming every single day, having consistent coaching sessions with their staff, and they are trying to get better constantly just to beat out every other team, edge them out, just to get sort of the bare minimum in terms of money, in terms of salary for the year.
So can I touch on it from a perspective of someone that was like deeply involved in challenges this year? So sitting in a call with guys all day and them having to play Modern Warfare. I don't want to bash the game too much. But it's not great from a competitive standpoint, and that's me.
What?
No.
Whoa! Calm down.
Just watching it is one thing, but having to actually physically sit through 6 domination maps a day that's just me watching it. Imagine what it's like for these guys playing this game, challenges wise. My guys, especially, getting no salary. It literally is all tournament earnings. I believe the only guys that were getting paid were Singularity and Trainhard. I don't know how often War were getting paid, if at all, at any point. So for them to have to sit through, scrimming this game for 10 months of the year and putting all their effort into a game that they all despise, for them to get a kick in the teeth and them say, top 20 teams are getting paid, and then you've got guys like Louis CM and Dreams and stuff. Them all coming back from playing Warzone for the past 6 months.
Yeah, they get money for winning one round, right?
And I got nothing against them for coming back and going, I'm just going to secure the bag, because if I was in Edge, I'd do exactly the same thing. But it's just a massive kick in the teeth for these guys that have grinded the whole year on this not very good game to then only get. Obviously, it's more prize money than challengers or amateur stuff has ever got before, but they tried to spread it out way too much, in my opinion.
I will interject real quick and just say as well, I do think that to an extent, the prize pool was messed up by the fact that challengers would have looked very, very different if we would have had the end of year challengers championships.
You wouldn't have paid out 40
the end of the year was
there.
supposed. Yeah, exactly. The end of the year was supposed to be the top 16 teams worldwide, not what was eventually, I think, 60 teams overall that ended up getting some form of payout. It was, that's such a big change, and that change messed up a lot of teams. It significantly altered what the prize pool distribution ended up looking like. For teams like Singularity and War, they could well have sort of, 1.5 times the amount they got, simply because they would have been paying for the entire prize pool rather than what ended up being 40% of it.
No, I feel you. Salvations, any thoughts on it? We haven't heard from you yet on the topic.
I mean, I really agree wholeheartedly that it was spread out way too thinly. And I totally see the side of of the tough situation that it was with having to split it up into the 3 areas and go that way with it. And it just sucks because the AM scene's by far at its best when you have full on open brackets and the best team wins with 150, 200 teams all there.
Absolutely.
That's when the AM scene's at its best. And I would love to see, I mean, hopefully we can get back to that as soon as possible. But for now, I mean, I think they maybe spread it a little bit too thin. I'm not too disappointed with how it was, but I would definitely have preferred it to maybe like be like top 16 everywhere instead of like top 24 potentially or something like that, you know? So
Yeah, I feel
they
you.
got prize pools.
I personally think top 12 would have been
Yeah.
pretty,
Yeah.
Top 12,
good. 'cause
top 12 would have
What,
been
for
good as
Europe
well.
or North America?
all regions. Because if you look at there was a Pro Point spreadsheet floating around for the whole year that was getting updated, and if you looked at the top 12 teams, like the guys, like some of those guys, no offense to them, they're not that good. And so for them to get a payout, that's for them to be like, oh, okay, I can make a bit of money off of this. But for the top 20 guys, that's when it gets to honestly not very good players.
Yeah.
I'm not very good myself, but that's because I don't try and compete. So I feel like I can
Oh.
kind of say this. I feel like I can kind of say this. They're not the best. And if you're
Yeah.
not good enough, it sounds really harsh, but if you're not good enough to place in the money, then you got to work harder. You got to get better.
Yeah.
No, I feel you
I
there.
agree.
Yeah, I mean,
absolutely. Sorry, Shiv, go on.
I'd like the whole disparity of like looking at the city circuit payout versus the challenger circuit payout, I think gets that way because of the fact that everything pivoted and changed so drastically. And I do think that there were a couple of there were a lot of teams that got paid out that, like you guys mentioned, didn't really touch the game much at all up until the last weeks to go through the LCQ and then get a couple grand and then be done. And I think, obviously, you know, moving into next year, we're hoping for something with more structure. But I think to round out this year, which was kind of a crazy year, everything went completely off plan, to kind of give more, maybe even more players a chance to play at that level, the challengers level, just to compete, even if it were for 2 weeks, to get, you know, a chance at money. I'm hoping that builds a lot of momentum going into next year, because now all of a sudden, like we mentioned, you know, there were really kind of two different hopes, I think, if you were an amateur player this last year. The first one being, I'm going to do well enough, I'm going to get picked up to go pro when it stays 5v5 and when there's expansion teams. Okay, it's 4v4 now, there are no expansion teams. So you go to plan B, which is you're hoping that you could go into challenger season with a lot of high regard and you could take over that scene in a more structured fashion. That's kind of what I'm thinking, at least as far as what next year should look like. And the fact that we did pay out maybe more players than we should have will hopefully allow more of those players to continue on or maybe make the decision of pursuing that dream. So,
yeah,
I agree.
Like early back in the year, like at the beginning of launch weekend, I talked to Exotic for a second. He was like, yeah, man, I turned down a few like sub offers to like, you know, pursue being a starter next year. You know, like a lot, like I'm sure tons of guys did. And like now you look back at it and like you missed out on 50K. And you're playing in the AM scene all year, playing like how many tournaments on the year, and like if you weren't finishing top 4, you definitely didn't make back that 50K.
Yeah, I mean, it's a double-edged sword though, right? Because you'd rather end up as a player sort of like on Singularity than compared to a player like Phantoms who sat and warmed the bench of the Paris
the entire
Legion for the entire year, and his stock has dropped. I mean, I'm probably gonna get shredded now for saying that.
I mean, you can't expect him to get picked up this next year. I mean,
he probably will. Don't get me wrong.
I don't know. I don't know if he will.
I don't know.
Like by somebody, right? I mean, that friendship circles still exist.
There's 12 spots.
No. I don't mean
player,
I don't mean picked up by a CDL team. He's not getting picked up by a CDL team.
Okay.
But I mean by like a top challengers team in North America.
100%
That will probably still happen. But he is lucky in that sense, just because I think there are a number of players in North American challengers specifically who will now be there that were maybe on CDL lineups this year, and their stock is going to have plummeted just by the fact that they essentially warmed the bench the entire year and nobody even saw them in a single game of Modern Warfare, which for them is fine. I'm sure they avoided this year and they're happy about that. But beyond that, you know, it doesn't look good going into Black Ops Cold War.
So with that in mind, going into next year, I guess I just want to pose the open question here. You get offered the 5th man spot next year on the CDL, on a CDL team. Do you take it? Or do you go to like situations like Exotic this last year and pass and say, I'd rather play in challengers?
Depends what you are, right? Surely, I mean,
yes.
Yeah. I mean,
how open it is now to play in challengers. I feel like if you can go, give me a 2-way contract, obviously not that easily, but you know what I mean. If you had that negotiation of getting a 2-way contract, even if you then have a sixth man as well, you can play on different teams. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You can literally play in challengers so easily now without having to worry about like your other sub, if you get what I mean.
No, I
But
feel
then
like
you've got to be
Yeah.
careful, right? You've got to get in a good organization that will let you go and play challenges.
I think I think all 12 teams should be letting everyone all
they
of their subs play.
should. Will
Right.
they?
I would imagine any of the
True.
good teams, the teams that everyone expects to be the best, like the top 4 after Rostermania, those teams will probably end up having pretty good subs that play 2 ways. I would imagine, because like those subs aren't expecting to ever end up in the starting lineup. But like
Maybe,
there's
maybe
like,
not.
all right, I'm gonna maybe not. But then they're gonna be down there and like I'm down to play for 50K in the Challengers League this year. Like I guess that's kind of the debate, but I don't know. There's so many pros and cons of both sides. That's why it's an interesting conversation, I think.
I mean, because
Yeah.
you have players like General who probably could have been a starter on a number of CDL teams last year and ended up sitting on the bench for Chicago, didn't get any play time at all through challengers, and that was the story for a lot of players. I mean, you put that conversation to Brack as well, I guess. A player that had a lot of excitement following him after
Man.
Black Ops 4, and then
Mhm,
you don't
mhm.
even get the chance to see him at all.
Brad
don't know.
got screwed.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
was in a real bad
Even
spot.
someone like Mayhem as well.
Oh,
Just look at all the
absolutely.
Toronto guys.
Well,
Yeah,
and
Ultra
a
as
lot
whole.
of the Heretics team, right? I mean, it was kind of that same way for Lucky and Metals
Oh, yeah,
outside of a
Lucky.
couple of showcases.
Lucky was so
Oh,
good
you're
last
lucky.
year.
Oh my word.
Yeah.
That guy's unreal. I think he's really talented. Him.
I think the entirety of last year's Heretics roster are super talented. To see
Right there
Lucky
with
and
you.
Metals in the position they are this year in the Ultra,
Yeah.
yeah, they deserve better.
Yeah, I agree.
So, with that in mind, there have been some people out there that have argued that next year challengers should be 12 teams. Every CDL team should have an academy squad. I'm sure we all have a lot of different opinions on that, but I want to get you guys' initial takes. Do you support or think that it's possible to run top 12 teams, challengers? That's it. You've got 12 teams. They're all academy teams of CDL squads. Possible, yay or nay?
No, not for me. Like personally, first of all, it's great. A great concept, right? Sounds really cool. Tier 2 league, where you get every single challengers or every single CDL team to have an academy/challengers roster. It's happened. We've seen teams either have an academy team in the first year or get very close to signing one. We've seen partnerships between CDL teams. That being said, they should not be forced to do it. It is, from a financial perspective, it makes 0 sense, like none. To be honest, at this point in time, I will say it straight up. I think from a viewership perspective, Challengers is not going to be worth investing in, especially during a time where COVID-19 is happening. There's been a ton of layoffs in these teams from various members of staff. That it just doesn't make sense. Why would you sign a roster that you then have to salary? Like it's just extra players. It's extra food on your plate that you've got to swallow. And to be honest, I don't think a number of these teams will want to do it. If you want to do it, fair play. I absolutely applaud you for supporting challengers and these players because they need these salaries. But I do not see that kind of concept ever working out.
Cam, I want to get your take. Oh, go ahead, Josh. Go ahead.
Oh,
Go on.
all right, it's fine. I was gonna say I'm definitely torn on it. I mean, there's kind of like, I mean, it depends how much money these teams would be investing into an academy team. I mean, if
Let's
you're spending,
say you're going to use
50K?
your substitute and you're going to use another 4 players. We'll say one sub is playing 2-way, or another 3 players, I should say then.
3 players, yeah.
could they create like unique contracts that are just for academy player
So
contracts?
like kind of like
you know?
what Sib was on like this year where he signed
Right.
with the Atlanta FaZe Academy team, right?
Yeah, so I mean, I think like if there's a world where like if you're cutting down from 4v4 to 5v5, you're gonna in theory have more flexibility with like salaried with when it comes to your starting rosters. Like if teams are kind of like expected to invest like between 25 and 50K into an amateur team that like runs through that you develop your own talent, it could play out that way. I think it's interesting to say the least, like to develop it in that way. I mean, there's enough personalities in COD where we now going into 4v4. I mean, the AM scene is going to be stacked.
Yeah.
For for COD future, it's going to be stacked, and so like you're going to have personalities there that people have heard of, and I think you could develop storylines around those guys. I mean, especially if Parasite's there again, like he's a massive storyline, a walking storyline, and like you can create, I think, storylines that would draw viewership to make it potentially viable in a sense where you could pull like 10, 15,000, maybe 20,000 in the future to watch it. if you develop the scene in the right way. And teams, if they have contracts signed with these guys and are able to create some sort of content around these guys, that might create branding for the AMP scene that was never there before.
Yeah.
Like if Parasite was signed as a two-way player for the Huntsman, Hex is all over creating content about Parasite in the AMP scene and creating and using that in a way. So I think there's ways where you can make it work if it's like done in the right way where money, makes enough sense for each team. The bigger probably conversation is how that would affect the rest of the AMs and how that would play out with some sort of like tier 2 AM pro league type situation.
No, I feel you. Cam, you obviously have a lot of experience on this subject, considering that the Connect 5 team at one point in time was supposed to be the London Royal Ravens Academy squad, and then that kind of separated. I personally don't even know the details of why it was at one point. Oh, okay, fair. So we're all speculative here.
I joined just after they got released, so I've always thought it was probably something to do with COVID and cutting costs. But in terms of like a T2 league, I think that would be really good in the future. Maybe after this whole kind of pandemic thing's blown over, if it ever does, and there's a bit more money being thrown around and people are a lot more comfortable. But at the moment, I think the main thing is I can't remember who I saw tweet it. I think it was Mad Cat. I might be wrong. Something about there not being enough organizations investing in amateur COD. I feel like as it grows, I think we need more organizations investing in teams. And because who gives a monkeys about Connect 5 versus what Maple's team was called, The Bedroom?
Yeah.
Like, who cares about that? But when you see Singularity versus War, everyone's like,
that's it.
Shit, I want to watch this. This is the game. But no one really knew who Connect 5 was after we were, because everyone still called us ex Royal Ravens, and the boys didn't want that. So that's why we came up with the name. But no one really knew who we were. So everyone ended up saying, like Wee Man and Co. or Mad Cat and Co. Whereas we need these people say like E United or I don't even or Elevate.
Insert
like
organization name here, right?
Yeah, anyone. Any big
for sure.
Been in COD in the past, but I think it'd be good to have a few academy teams. Like if a Chicago had one, like you said, I think that would be incredible because they would be able to push a lot of content towards challenges. And I think Atlanta will probably have one, and I don't know who else will, but I think if a few teams started having them and we saw success through these academy teams, I feel like it may push the other teams in the league in the future to try and pick up an amateur team and maybe form it into a T2 league, because I think that would be really beneficial.
The interesting thing about the whole signing of an academy team is like we just had that with the Atlanta FaZe Academy. And yeah, you had Gravity and Journey, who were the substitute players for the Atlanta FaZe, so it made sense to use them as the Atlanta FaZe Academy team. But is there actually a world where these academy teams are going to be used as a way to ladder up players into their own pro team? The way that I'm looking at it is you do what E United did, where you have a cadet roster that consisted of Celium and Simp, and then you put massive contract buyouts on them, and then all of a sudden you're just rolling in a little bit of extra dough because you took these scouted players that nobody could touch, you sign them onto a contract. Once they turn 18, you then sell them off to different teams that need them. That feels like what will more likely be the case when it comes to something like Challengers. I don't think we'll ever see a world where it's like, for instance, like baseball, where like you've got your farm team and then, you're not playing well, you're going down to AAA, and this guy's playing very well, he's going to be pulled immediately right back up. I don't know if we'll ever fully have that in esports in whole, not necessarily just in COD, because typically you're looking at who is the best player to fit my needs, not who is the best player for my academy team to fit my needs. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I agree. No, I agree with that. I think like the best teams that I think are positioned well enough to do that right now, I would suggest are actually the London Royal Ravens and the Paris Legion, just because of the fact that they have a ton of European talent to pick from. Whereas if you take a look at the other sort of 10 teams, it's all North American, and you're going to have to pick from a wider crop of players, but at the same time, you're also competing with 9 other teams to get those players. So yeah, for someone like the London Royal Ravens, where they had the greatest opportunity this year with Connect 5 as their team, that's just a perfect example. I mean, they almost brought Nasty up. They tried to bring Nasty up, even though he technically wasn't with Connect 5 at that point. He was with War. He technically was with War at the time, but still, that's a perfect example of you looking towards this big talent pool and saying, hey, we'll pick this guy up. And if you do create an academy team, it gives you a direct line. You're already under the banner.
Fair. Totally fair.
I think it's a bit of a strange one with kind of esports or COD in general. That, like you see, sometimes you might pick up a team, but they might not be. If you then having problems on your main roster, they might not be the kind of players you want to fit in with your main team. Because one, maybe performance level or talent wise, but it may also be, as what people say, vibes. The people that are on this academy roster, the guys on the main team that say they want to drop one of their players, but they don't really get along or kind of vibe with the players in the academy team. And then they don't pick any of those up, and then they go and cherry pick someone else. It's all, I feel like COD or esports in general was just very different with kind of compared to like what you say normal sports.
Yeah, I would agree.
There's not always just like a simple jump from like say like a football or soccer academy team where players just make the jump.
Right.
There's a big disparity between amateur and pro stuff, in my opinion.
I think a lot of that is
skill level, but in terms of just making the jump, it's very difficult.
Yeah,
especially now with it 4v4 and 12 teams.
And the culture is something I think that is not a talent gap that you can surpass. It's just what the culture is of, I know this guy, I played with him. Yeah, you might have a player, so-and-so in Challengers might be the next best thing, but if he's not in with that circle of people, I mean, Brezi's like the perfect example, dude. He shredded up the Challengers scene this year and sat on the bench the entire year for the Paris Legion.
I mean, COVID did kind of get in the way of that, to be fair.
Yeah, COVID, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's true,
he
but
probably
still.
wasn't able to travel, so whether they wanted to pick him up anyway, we don't know. But yeah, I think COVID got in the way of that one, unfortunately.
Weird scenes.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like, how is the AM scene going to develop into the future? And at some point, there needs to be a reason for organizations to want to put money into the top, 20 teams in the scene, or maybe more than that, and like there needs to be a reason why orgs want to pick up these guys. And like whether it's gonna be like soccer/football, where like, like you're like Ajax or Monaco and you're picking up these guys and then flipping Mbappe for 50 million euros or whatever, like this is gonna be the same thing where you're picking up the next young god and then you're flipping them. And that's kind of like how these small organizations see the potential to make their money, is to flip the next young god to the Atlanta FaZe or something like that, And like that'll be interesting to see if that starts developing in that way, or if it's gonna be more traditional with how we've seen it with like smaller esports orgs just kind of paying little salaries for one event at a time for teams.
Right. So with that all in mind, we've kind of meandered on what has kind of occurred and what very well could occur over this last half an hour. But going from last year to this upcoming year, just without the implication of anything structured or anything formalized, what are some of your biggest wants going into this next year, whether it's prize pool wise, whether it's something that is like more of a global style LAN, obviously COVID pending, maybe it's broadcast things. What are your guys, some of like your biggest takeaways from last year going into next year that you want to see improved upon, I guess is the best thing. Kind of frame the question.
In the challenger stuff.
In the challenger scene, yeah.
Yeah. I think just more exposure, because we had to end up having is it like Baker, the Big Boy Bakery podcast guy, having to stream some of the games for people to watch, like on his own personal channel. When these games between, say, War, Singularity, Connect 5, Train Hard, these are games that the CDL should be pushing and getting someone in to record and live stream, because these guys are I'm talking strictly EU here, obviously. But then you can go to America and like Atlanta FaZe Western. These kind of games should be the ones being streamed, because they're the guys that are coming through. And it's so unfair on them because they don't have the opportunity to get any exposure apart from their own streams. And Bids, you look at Bids, he's probably the only one who's got proper exposure because he streams on his game.
He streams,
and people can see how he plays.
Off too.
You can vaguely see how his teammates play, but they hide the minimap. So even then, you can't see their positioning on the map. So I think more exposure. The prize pooling I thought was pretty good this year. I thought obviously at Champs it was a bit different, but they had a lot of events for amateurs to make money and all of that. The most money that amateurs have kind of received in however many years. But yeah, exposure for me is definitely the main thing. I said that from the start of the year when they said they weren't going to be streaming anything.
Yeah.
So-
Can I go off on a tangent or a rant here real quick? Am I allowed to do this?
The floor is yours. Your big screen. Let's hit it.
So I'll preface this by saying, right, so this is something I think I wanted to get off my chest this year. I'll preface this by saying Challenges did an insane job of turning around this year. You know, to have to turn around the CDL generally
100%.
from what was the terrible first draft for a format going weekly around the world where these teams would play 1 or 2 matches, and then to change it to what were essentially mini events with 8 teams every 2 to 3 weeks. Incredible job, right? Beautifully done. And then to do the same with Challenges, essentially, where the format just wasn't that great. And then to deal with everything we had with online and to bring broadcasts in, really, really well done. And I give massive props to everybody at Challenges for doing that. That being said, I still think we're kind of missing the mark a little bit on a variety of things. First things first, I think the format is a little too swamped. I think it would be much better for players to have to go to less events / play less events with higher prize pools. I think, you know,
It's
that would,
insane.
yeah, I don't think we should be having 15 home series events or however many we actually had this year. You know, first of all, if they were on LAN, organizations don't have the money to send these players to LAN events every single week. And they need this money as well, right? I mean, the players need the money. They need to compete at these events. And even online as well, it just burns players out. You shouldn't have to play an event every single weekend. That's in terms of the format, and that's just my opinion. Maybe players feel differently. But from what I get anyway, I think players are a little burned out on how much they've had to play with the pricing for each individual event. Secondly, I'd say in terms of the broadcast, I would say the broadcast quality suffered a ton from the fact that it was done in what we'll call a Sky Sports style way.
Sure, yeah.
And Cam actually touched on one of them, quite frankly, the biggest issue with the broadcast. And I would say there are 2 big issues. The first is that you do miss these big storylines, these big moments. Singularity versus War was the entire storyline for a Europe
period.
Right? To not to discount Connect 5 or Train Hard, they were the 3rd and the 4th best teams. They were sometimes the 2nd best teams. It happened throughout the year. But to say
the branding of the 2 orgs.
Yeah, the narrative of the 2 orgs was all year long. Yep.
Oh yeah.
To say anything else besides the fact that Singularity and War were the 2 teams, and there was such a massive wave of momentum riding into that matchup. War coming from the losers bracket, Singularity had done what they'd failed to do for weeks on end, and then to not broadcast the match is at least not broadcast the match live or the losers bracket final live, right, between War and Connect 5. It blows my mind, and I get why, but at the same time, you need regional broadcasting. You need it. There is. I get it. I get it from just you're spending more money to do that. But at the end of the day, it would solve a ton of problems. Because to be honest, not only are you currently missing these big moments, you're not setting up properly. I'll say it. I sat and watched pretty much every single hour, every single minute of Challenges when it was on for the championships. But there were so many marks missed on terms of the storylines, and it happened in NA, it happened in EU, and it happened in APAC. And it leads me on to my second point, which is that you cannot hire 3 to 4 casters and expect them to know every little detail about every single region. It doesn't work.
It doesn't.
Like,
No,
as much as I appreciate, like, Shift isn't. It's. I'm going to blow Shift's horn a little bit here, but Shift is super smart and he knows exactly what's up. But you can't hire other casters that maybe haven't even touched Call of Duty for like the past year and expect them to know everything and present everything as it should be. I wouldn't even know everything about North American and APAC challenges, but for sure as hell, I'd know a ton about European challenges, and I know there are a ton of other casters that would. And I think that's one of the things that the CDL can improve on for challenges next year is if they have the budget for it, and it is a big if, because obviously, you know, again, this is a cost-cutting year, and at the end of the day, challenges isn't that profitable. I completely get why they don't have it, but you know, especially with COVID, because we did actually get a broadcast because we were online, there should be regional broadcasts. There's way too much missed because we don't have them.
Feels like you've been holding that one in for a little bit.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie. I'll say it, I love Challengers Championships. I love everything. It was just stupid how so good it was. I would argue at points there are better storylines in the Challengers Championships.
This year
than there are in the CDL.
Absolutely, there were. I mean, just the amount of things to talk about. Even from like, if you were to take one major point away from each of the 3 regions, Renegades win 1 million straight. Boom. Like that is such you could go into that so deeply about like, okay, like this is what everything is looking like. This is what it means for the entire region. You guys already talked about War versus Singularity, but then like Carnage Gaming for North America, like I'm not going to say out of nowhere, but let's be honest. If you weren't paying attention to Challengers, no one expected that team to get to Grand Finals.
Yeah.
It just
Exactly.
wasn't a thing. So, I mean,
Yeah.
wild stuff. Josh, get on there, dude. I know you want to get in the
Man,
mix.
I think your point about like the season format was really interesting because I feel like the CDL's in a tough spot with how they want to organize that when it comes to like once we get lands back, especially because like I get the whole it's a tough spot because like it does put AMs in a really like difficult situation to have to travel each week to a different city in the United States. Like, good Lord, it's impossible for some of the guys to actually do. And like it really split up the scene, and you were only having like 32 at most 64 teams there, you know, and like sometimes less than that for the challengers events, which was not an ideal situation at all. But like at the same time, generally, you know, in all other CWL's history, the open bracket has been a significant portion of the LAN attendance, which is what they need at the LAN events to drive interest and revenue and interaction and hype overall. And so it's like, that's why it's such a tough situation, because they don't want to get rid of the LAN events happening each week at the home series. But like when it comes back to having LAN events again, I mean, you kind of need them there to drive the interest of attending in a way, but it's not an ideal situation for the amateur players as a whole, because it really sucks to have to fly each week to all those insane cities, which is impossible.
It's funny that you brought up the whole open bracket system, because that kind of hit me. You know, Black Ops 4 is like my first year getting into Call of Duty, and I was like, wait a second. If the open bracket wasn't happening at the same venue, what would this audience look like?
Yep.
And I think we kind of saw what they were going to look like this year, like with especially Atlanta and LA, right? Like Atlanta especially, like I know that like statistically, you know, I heard that they actually made the most amount of revenue off of their own home series based on the events that they were throwing around the actual home series itself. But I'll tell you flat out, there was nobody there. I mean, it was like 4 or 5 rows back. Maybe that was maxed out. Everything else was I like to be comfortable.
Yeah.
I'll express my 6-foot social distancing. I mean, it was not nearly as well attended as you would expect, and I think there is some expectation because that Challengers home series had like 24 teams at it, compared to the usual where it's like 128 when you had the handful of open events. That kind of brings me to my point. You know, if we're going into next year in the same fashion that we were going to go into this year, like if you were to do 2020 all over again, I would have loved to have seen the Challenger scene. Yeah, maybe there was stuff every weekend, but you labeled events as a minor event or a major event. So that way you don't feel the pressure of having to go to every single event that's there. Maybe the minor events, it's, hey, me and these 2 other guys from our team, we live pretty local, but the other guys are on the other side of the country. Let's find 2 other guys just to play with for fun on those minor event weekends. Maybe you get a couple of teams that will travel, but then you need your major events, the ones that could essentially be those higher prize pools. Maybe there's space, you know, a month and a half in between those events. So that way you also battle my other big concern with the Challenger scene is just the overall culture that we saw from North America is not good for the longevity of what a tier 2 scene needs to look like for Call of Duty. When you're swapping rosters every single weekend, there's no way you're gonna get picked up for a major team. That's why I think teams like Singularity and War and Connect 5, even though they made a couple of changes, why they at the end of the year, even though they were in what I think a lot of people would label as the second region compared to where the numbers lie, which is in North America, they were in the best position to get picked up if there were expansion teams.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, you know, heading into like a year next year where you're going to have so many pros heading down there as well. Like,
yes,
I mean, I don't know what your guys' expectation is, but I would imagine most of the pros are going to try to play with the pros. Like, they're going to be like, all right, let's kind of like segregate ourselves from most of the AMs. I think Temp was even talking about that today. He was like, yo, if I'm going down the AM scene, no offense, but I'm playing with the pros. You know,
right?
He's like, I ain't playing with. I don't know what the AMs are trying to play for. I don't know if the AMs are trying to play to move up the ladder, if they're trying to play to win, but I'm trying to play to win. You know, so I think that was an interesting conversation to have about like how that's going to play out. Maybe we say that for later, but I agree with the format.
Do it right now. Get into it.
It's
your
like
time.
I 100% agree with you. The culture when it comes to how they are going to play with teams, like how teams are gonna stay together needs to change. I mean, it was cool to see Atlanta FaZe's academy like come out and like get better as the year went on, and then they were a dominant team at the end of the year, and they stayed together obviously for the most part throughout the whole year. So it's like I would hopefully we can see a little bit more of that next year and like create those storylines, and that'll help drive interest as well because they're able to build a brand around their team instead of just
not
as
just the
individuals.
Right.
Yeah, skipping across the pond. Right.
Yeah, I feel you.
Can I just go back and just touch on, how the amateur events are run?
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
feel like, so obviously last year was the first year that we had challenges, whereas before we had open bracket, and then the open bracket led into them playing with the pros. So obviously back then there was more exposure for per se amateurs, and they got where was I going with my point? I've forgotten now. I feel like it's a learning curve now for these guys that are trying to put on these challenges events and trying to figure out how it should be run, because I get it's 2 years in now, so they should have some kind of an idea potentially going into next year. But especially last year, I actually almost thought it was ran probably better last year. I probably can't really say that because it was online this year, but I feel like they're still going to learn. I feel like they're trying to learn the difference between what it was from, let's say, World War II compared to now.
Right.
Sure.
I mean, it's interesting because last year we kind of had a trial run with how it would look like if amateurs weren't going to be playing in the pool play anymore. I mean, because after Vegas, they weren't playing in the pool play anymore. And we just had a very separate AM scene and pro scene. It wasn't integrated anymore, and it worked really, really well. I mean,
a couple thousand, but they had like 4,000 or 5,000 people watching every open stream on the live stream.
Yeah, and they were playing, only against the AMs. There was no integration, and like the prize pools were pretty good overall. I think like winning teams they're taking like home like maybe 20,000 like as like a team if you win, which is pretty good. And like again, if we went, and that's like major format, which I agree with you. Is like we need to have the major format back in the AMP scene next year in some way for it to like really be cultivated healthily, especially on LAN.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think like the format this year did not lend itself well. If you compare what worked well last year to the 2020 season, the difference, in my opinion, is night and day. And I think the problem was in the 2019 season was that if you consider every single LAN event, there was like 4 or 5 streams being run at any one time. So to get 4,000 or 5,000 viewership in an open event consistent, that's not bad at all. When there are 4 streams being run at the exact same time, you have a lot of options for what you want to watch from the pros. And I think, taking that opportunity or taking something from that to this year, I think maybe it was kind of unfortunate that they saw that viewership and said, well, we don't want to take those 5,000 viewers away from the pro stream.
I get that.
But yeah, I think like the problem with it is that the formatting from this year did not lend itself very well to a broadcast. It just didn't. Like, to be frank, if you do have 12 or 15 or whatever home series events, to realistically ask for a broadcast for every single one of those is just, it's not a realistic expectation. Whereas you compare it to last year and there was 6 or 7 open events throughout the entire year. It is a realistic expectation to see those open events casted.
No, I'm right there with you. I mean, and really good point that Roper put in the chat. $250,000 amateur bracket in Minnesota. Only one series
and it was
of
sick.
the 2 best of 5s, that got streamed. And one of them was
while we're here, right? Sorry, I just want to make this point real quick.
We're about to touch on what I think you're about to touch on.
I'm gonna say this: that event, whoever made the decision to say, let's have a hype battle. And this is early on as well. Hype battles. You literally have the opportunity to stream the finals of challenges in your hands. It is literally all you need to do is just have it streamed. You don't need to pay casters anymore because you're paying them the yearly salaries. They are going to do it for you. The hype battles, I get it. It's cool. You want to make the league look awesome.
It brings a casual environment in some fashion, right? Like
come on, man.
It's frustrating from our point of view because like we bleed everything COD competitive, right? And like we want to see everything besides just the pro league. We want to see these challengers that are up and comers. No, I totally get it. But at the same point, it's literally that is like the halftime show of a football game for COD.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you've got to appease the casual audience at large, and it's going to piss us off. It's going to, and it's the way it is. And I know I can see all of you losing your minds over it. I totally get it.
Like in any normal setting, I get it. The hype battle should be there. Right? It's cool. It makes sense, but it shouldn't be taking a priority over the finals of a $250,000 tournament, especially when you've broadcasted the first.
Yeah, I can feel that.
I get it. From there are obviously a lot of things that we as a four are not going to get or grasp, considering we don't run behind the scenes. We don't run the numbers and this stuff, but just that decision specifically, I think, is one that I think they know wasn't correct, and they have done a lot to fix that over the course of the second half of the year specifically.
Yeah. I think that the whole thing about this last year, it is a learning experience at the end of the day. As much as we look at U-City franchise, I think to a certain point, consciously or subconsciously, you're sitting there saying X amount of money, $1 million a year. Why is this not perfect right now? Like, that is the desire, right? And especially when we see things like the LCS, and you've got even maybe traditional sports models and things like that we watch on a regular basis that we compare immediately to, we kind of pull straws at. But I will still say this much, that the momentum that was picked up, even with the hard pivot that had to be made from the offline year into an online year, was an incredible move in the right direction. And I think because that move went to online, a lot of lessons were learned immediately quick. And I'm not just talking about like the broadcast production standpoint, but being able to do a Challengers Cup, that wasn't initially in the books. It was just supposed to be a launch weekend, a mid-season event, and a finals. That was it. So the fact that we actually got 6 full broadcasts was more than we would have gotten in the previous format. So I think that with everything kind of getting screwed up with the pandemic, it actually lended towards a lot of successful moments throughout the entirety of the year. But it just sucks because we're still looking at the format. Obviously, the question that I posed was at the beginning of the year, what were some of the things that you would want to change? So,
that's
totally
the thing. I mean, I know how they kind of threw the ball into the team's courts for the open brackets, like at their own home their own home series, because they had to fund it, they had to like organize it, and it was it just felt like a big mess. With and just a very unorganized mess where since it was decentralized from the COD League, which just felt weird. And I know esports engine kind of took over the running of that, but I don't feel like there was enough communication between the COD League and esports engine about how that played out with each and the teams themselves, because I felt like the teams themselves were very confused. Maybe it was just a first year thing, and again, I think it was the same expectation. If there was going to be a broadcast for the LAN events, it was on the teams. And that just seems impossible. If we're gonna have broadcast next year, or whenever we're back on LAN for open brackets, it has to be centralized by the CDL.
I agree. And to that same accord, just to kind of scoot in there because the chat's talking about it, but the fact that at that Minnesota launch weekend event, the event was treating the Challengers players like they were spectators, right? We're not giving you free anything, no free water. They purposely turned off the cold water at certain moments, no water fountains, so that way you were forced to buy things as a spectator, which again, that's the problem, right? We were talking about this before, when you're relying on these open events or these Challengers events to bring, we'll say just a casual number, 80% of your live audience. When do you draw the line between this player is a player and this player is an audience member, right?
I was repping
tough.
I was repping that, and we were going in the back to go grab our staff waters to bring to bring to Singularity and Hybrid Black when they were playing. We were going to the back to go to the staff lounge and grabbing waters for them, because all of the water fountains were already turned off because it was midnight, so it was just wow, that is tough. That is tough.
Yeah, agreed.
So I guess go ahead, Cam.
I was just going to say, in terms of the London event, because obviously I was there, I think I thought the whole event was ran pretty well, but the only bad thing is how close the challenges were.
Yeah, you could feel the bass as you were walking around.
I think Adam Defrag said it to me in a call that he couldn't hear his teammates at one point because of how loud the crowd was.
Yeah.
He couldn't hear footsteps or anything. Just
you need to stay silent.
Yeah,
just time it with a bass drop.
I thought was how close that it was. Literally the back row of the crowd, the desk, and then
Yeah, and then the open
challenge
bracket.
section, it was
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the London 2019 setup was way better than the London 2020 setup. That's,
So
that's
yeah,
what I'll say.
two separate rooms for
Mhm.
both.
Worked very well.
this
Yeah.
is a really interesting conversation point, and we've kind of danced around maybe one central question, and I'm just going to throw it out. Do you think that there is a world that challengers events could or should live in a different space than the pro events? Or do the pro events need to have challengers at the venue in the same space as the pro event?
Like,
No.
all right. No, well, no and yes. Like, here's the thing, right? Because I said it earlier and touched upon it earlier. The fact of the matter is, the current format in the CDL does not lend itself to a great challengers experience.
No.
Like as you said earlier on, right? These challengers players are also the audience,
Right.
and you therefore have to have these at least 12 open events where you then have to have 12 challengers events. If not, the audience might not be there because they are also your players. And as soon as you do that, you then have to, I guess, have 12 broadcasts, 12 very well designed open areas for these players where they have to be accommodated properly. Who's paying for that? And again, it is a problem, right? In my opinion, I do think in a perfect world, and I'm sure you'll get onto this when we talk about the perfect format or whatever, I think that there should be open events similar to what we had in the 2019 season. I don't think there should be an event every single time there is a CDL weekend. Of course, the problem back with that, though, is, again, as I said, the challengers players are your audience. So the audience might not be there unless you selectively pick the events which you know are going to have the audience anyway, like Chicago, like your Atlanta, like your London. And even then, you can't pick London because London needs to be an open event. There are so many problems. There are so many issues, and I am very happy that I'm sitting here as a freelance caster and not a member of Activision or the CDL who have to deal with these problems, because we can sit here all day and talk about how we would solve these issues, but at the end of the day, as soon as we come up with a solution, there are a ton of problems with said solution. It is an unwinnable situation, at least in my mind.
I don't know. This is off the cuff. I have no preparation on this. It just feels like the only solution to run something is that it's a venue selection thing, right? You need to have just enough space for a live audience with a pro environment, but you also have to have space for the challengers environment to exist in its own blanket. And I think the Armory actually was probably one of the better places for that.
It was.
Like, as weird and how mean to pun it was with, they're making us play in a parking lot. Like, well, that wasn't true. It was completely enclosed, but that's like the perfect space for it. And even still, up until the final day, like, you had ushers in the crowd be like, hey, everyone move forward to the VIP section. We have to make it look good on camera. It's just, I don't know. Maybe it's just the simple fact that Call of Duty isn't ready for live events yet. Maybe the viewership just isn't there yet for live events. Because I don't think you can realistically sit there and say, we can run home series events, but 80% of our audience, again, random number, is challengers-based audience. If they're competing, they're not in the audience. So how exactly do we finesse that to kind of have competitive integrity on one side, but audience participation on the other? I don't know if there's an answer for it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I feel like, they kind of try to outgrow their venues a little bit too quickly, maybe. I mean, like this year, like they were choosing like legitimate arenas to host these events in.
True.
Where like they were trying to avoid the conference center type, event center type venues, but like, I don't know if COD can't fill the Atlanta Phases like basketball like, arena that they selected. Like, it just, unless you're running a COD Champs where it's gonna work and you're gonna have that insane marketing budget to drive people there, and like it's kind of like a mecca event for the season, it's not going to work otherwise with the fans if you don't have a LAN event, especially there. Like, if you're not having an amateur scene there, there's no way.
I'm being serious. The smallest venues or smaller venues create a better atmosphere.
I agree.
Look at the London event. The Copper Box is, it's fairly big, but you know that when you come to London, it's going to be a big crowd and they're going to be loud. And so that kind of you get whatever kind of venue to fit people in, it's going to be loud. But when you compared to like say NA events, the crowd doesn't tend to be as kind of you could say obnoxious.
It's a good word.
And when they're trying to use these big venues to try and it's almost like to show off, like, oh, we can host a COD event in this venue.
Yeah,
it doesn't work because however many people are there, the whole arena just looks bigger compared to what crowd there is, and Americans just aren't as loud as Brits. So when they're chanting or whatever, it just doesn't sound as good.
But I think the other side of it is that that kind of crowd energy in the esports world it has to be infectious. Like, the one thing that I noticed that Minnesota did really, really well, we're getting a little off topic, so we'll stay here for a minute, but not for too long. But for Minnesota, they did a really great job of making the environment feel like a traditional sports environment. Like, they had everything on the banners were playing like what they wanted you to cheer. They had people that were trying to hype up the crowd at different moments. The only thing they were missing was like your college basketball student section, where you have your elite Minnesota Rocker fans in one corner that could start making up chants, and it's central, and it's a place that everyone will hear it, and they will immediately participate with it.
A good idea.
You have to have a crowd starter. That's the one thing. Atlanta had none of that, dude. Atlanta, like, there was a four-piece that happened, and people were like... And I was like, what the
hell? It was
depressing.
It was so depressing.
Really depressing. But no, I think you're right, though, about that. When it comes to London, it's not just the fact that the crowd is usually at a 3-drink minimum, but it's also packed in heavily together. And they're just... I mean, I heard Parliament was a 3-drink minimum, so we'll say a 5-drink minimum for the Copper Box. But that's just one of those things that I feel like the venue helps build that culture when it comes down to it.
Yeah, I will say, as a final word on this topic from me at least, it also has to be down to the way you use your venue. Again, London 2019 versus London 2020, exactly the same venue, completely different atmospheres. And the reason for it was that they made 2 crucial mistakes in London 2020. The first was that the layout of the event didn't do very well. If you talk about London 2019, you were all basically packed together. It was insane. You were always next to somebody that was hyping you up.
They just had you in the actual stadium seating, right?
From exactly. It worked very well. Exactly. It worked very well. And secondly, the big mistake they made in 2020 was the fact that the players, once they were done playing, they were only allowed, I think it was wings, to sit in the wings. They weren't allowed to sit in the area which you actually had to buy the spectators.
Oh, got you. Okay.
So what happened was they found themselves, if I remember correctly, having to push people that hadn't left the venue down to the area, like upgrading people for free. If they don't make that mistake again next year, they'll be fine and dandy. But like, those are the 2 big things for me that I think they needed to fix.
It's one of those things that I think that there has to be some considerations, and maybe this online team has allowed the league to look at it. Maybe team owners have looked at it as well when it comes down to, the challenger scene or the open scene is the majority of your fan base. How do you get them there to compete, but at the same point get them to also be there as a fan and make sure that both worlds are separate but equal? I don't really know the best way of putting it, to where you can have them exist on separate planes and they're still getting the appropriate love that you want, like an open stream that we had from last year. Then be able to immediately transition as you get knocked out into becoming an audience member. Definitely weird, to say the least. But that brings us to our big kind of chewing point, which is, what is your perfect format for the Challengers year for next year? And I will sit here and I will let you guys start first if you want. Otherwise, I will be happy to share my own first, and you can chew on that. I've put a lot of thought into this. I know Salvation's League, we were talking about it a little bit on your BO3 podcast, just in brief about what it could look. And I know that you were starting to go down a road that was getting all the trees and bushes and all the proper foliage that you want to make a scenic route towards what the Challenger scene would look like. So what are the things that you guys are looking for? What is your perfect format? We can do this individually, we can do this collectively, whatever you guys want.
Oh, I haven't got enough time to give it some thought, so if anyone else wants to.
I'll let Salvations go. He seems like he's got this grand.
Okay, he doesn't. I don't think he wants to go first. All right, I'll go first if you guys want. I'll be happy to go first.
Hey.
Okay, so here's my idea. Go back mentally into what World War II looked like, where you've got different stages to a regular season, right? Adopt that for Challengers next year. Put a way to where you start with an open tournament, top X amount of teams, get into your first league year or league split of the challengers.
And that's a
it's a major open event, kind of like how Minnesota was. If we're still dealing with COVID, turn it into 3 different regions, have 3 different open events, and then have a list. So, like, for instance, in North America and Europe, your top 16 teams from that event are your first season, or your first split of the regular season of challengers. They are in their own league. Maybe in APAC, it's only top 8, because let's be honest, you're not going to get 16 competitive teams in APAC. Maybe it's only top 12. Who knows? Maybe top 12 is a better number. But whatever it is, top 12, top 16, top 8, set number of teams after an open event, qualify for your challengers. You then have a first split of your challengers, which is, we'll say, 2 months long. You play regular season, kind of same format tournaments where you kind of just have a grouping. You play through double elimination. You get your winners. You accumulate points. By the end of that split, your top, we'll say, 8 teams out of 12, they are going to a playoff, which is a major tournament, has $50,000 or whatever. It's your more major prize pool. You play through that. Your bottom 4 teams go down to a relegation tournament. And while all of this split thing is happening in the challenger scene, every single weekend there is an open tournament, open division. So you're getting 3 divisions. You're getting your open division, you're getting your challengers division, you're getting your pro division. And everything is split up into season splits. So that way you have the ability to North America, you have a roster rule. You can't make swaps every single weekend. You're forced to play with essentially the same, at least core group of players for upwards of 2 months. Then you get a playoff. You either make the playoff, do well, win money, or you don't. You're still into challengers for the next season split, or you really didn't have a good year. You have to re-qualify through a relegation tournament where your top 4 open teams overall from the previous weeks play up against your bottom 4 challengers teams. The next best 4 get in. Rinse, wash, repeat. You do that 3 different times. It all ends up in one giant challengers finals, where every single challengers team at the end from each of the regions then come together. That's kind of my brief idea, just to kind of label it out without things in the mix. But I think there needs to be a way. Yeah, there needs to be a way, I think, to make sure that there is an established league, but you can't have it the whole season because that's just not realistic.
Right.
You want to try to build it to where teams are sticking together. They're trying to get better as a collective unit. That's good for the culture of the whole scene. And then beyond that, you still have an open scene below that to where players who might not be at that level yet don't just have to sit and play things like Gunfight. They can still play every single weekend in these open tournaments. And then maybe if they're good enough by the end of that split, they can get into that relegation tournament to possibly become the next challengers team.
Yeah, no, I like that quite a lot. I think
I agree.
for the 2021 season, you got to ask the question first of all, like, is it going to be online or is it going to be
right?
online?
That's the big thing, right?
It's going to be online, if we're honest.
You feel like it has to be.
I think it's going to be online.
At least to start with, it will probably be online.
It will probably be online. If we're on LAN, we're talking on a LAN setting. I think you're looking at a system where you can actually start to be mashing these players together from various different regions. You're looking at an entirely different system where you can have your separate challengers leagues in stages, as you suggest, Shift, and then they come together at the end of the season for what would be the challengers championships. I do definitely think, regardless of what happens, we need a league. There needs to be some kind of league format. There needs to be regional-based broadcast, because at this point in time, it's great having the Challengers Cups. I think they were great for the interim of what we had with COVID-19 and everything being online, and the Challengers broadcast at the end of the season was great. But I think, realistically speaking, the best possible way they could get around everything is just to introduce a league with like 16 teams in North America, 12 teams in Europe, 10/8 teams in APAC. Give yourself a chunky prize pool for each stage, and then just go from there. And I think also, if you then introduce that in, I don't think the players would care that much if they were to be given less open events, maybe like 4 to 6 throughout the entire year.
There are too many this year.
They do have some. There's just too many. Like, it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
If you were to replace those open events with a league, then it would work so much better.
I also think that could really benefit kind of players that play on teams that are kind of outside, say, the top 12 in each region. Because if they then, like you say, Shift, if they had something, say, of the open events kind of every week for these, lesser than top 12 teams, then they have opportunity to make themselves some money as well. Obviously,
yes,
wouldn't be a massive prize pool, but like with
something to keep them
earlier
going
about
though.
the whole, like the champs thing. Obviously, it paid out top 20, which we already touched on earlier. That it then aids these guys to be able to kind of pursue this as a potential career. Like if they're winning these open events, guys in the top 12 teams, they might go, especially if it's streamed, they can go, okay, well, we like the look of this guy, and then they pick him up, and then he's now playing in the kind of Challengers League. And I actually think that'd be a really good way to kind of build up talent rather than these guys just playing in these full-on open bracket, open events every week against the top teams, then getting top 64, but they might actually be quite a good player, but they're getting top 64 because they're seeded 30th.
Inappropriately,
in the second round, they're
Right.
playing against SMG and getting smoked, and then it's a one-rounder, so then they're out.
Okay. Pro points is a problem, I think, generally, to be honest. It's hard to replace the system, but pro points is completely horrendous later down the line. For those players that are trying to get into the year, you start the year and you're not 18, join in halfway through.
It's tough,
You're
right?
in trouble.
You're absolutely in
Unless
trouble.
you're... Yeah, and it goes on to the next year because although obviously players are going to get out of this cycle, I'm not going to suggest this is a catch-all for everybody, but it is a problem if you are starting to get off, say you turn 18 halfway through the year and you garner some pro points. Just because you don't have enough, the first event of the year is going to be based on pro points from the last year, and then teams are always building teams around pro points for the most part. Obviously, there's more to it, but I think pro points is, generally speaking, a problem, and it is absolutely emphasized when it comes down to the 1K/2K events. Like, it just I don't know what to do. This is probably just me bitching, if anything, but I don't know what you do. But I think you're absolutely right, Cam, in pointing out that these teams that are sort of top 32 are just going to get top 32 every single time because they're facing Singularity and War before they even get anywhere.
And especially when I think it was up until top 8 as well this whole year. It was single bracket,
single elimination till top 6.
These guys come up
8.
against them in round 4 or round 3.
That is
GG.
tough.
They don't even
dude.
then have the chance to go through a losers bracket.
Like,
Or
I have a
earn points
solution,
because you're
right?
finishing outside the top 30. Is it top 32 that got points this year? Or is it top 16? I don't remember.
I don't know. So
But I think some kind of CMG system from, I think it was like the 20. When was it the pros were still playing 2Ks and such? Was it World War II that was happening?
Yeah,
Yeah.
World War II.
That was infamous.
And, the CMG
Censor
system,
situation.
where I think at a certain point in the year you start to just separate the top 16 seeds or the top 12 seeds, and then basically the rest of the teams are fighting for the last 4 spots to go through on Sunday. Something like that, I just think would be so much better. It stops. It doesn't force these top tier teams to just have to go through these first few rounds where there's 2-0, 3-0s. And beyond that as well, it just helps players out that are stuck in a rut that are top 32. It gives them a chance.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the league is absolutely necessary. My biggest question off the rip is how do they operationally make it happen? Especially when you're like you said, the biggest challenge is the difference of online and then transitioning potentially to LAN, whether that's this year or maybe we're online this whole year, and then next year. So you have to come up with kind of like an alternated system the following year. So it's tough with the consistency right now. I would imagine this year they're going to try to find something that is as simple as possible. But I mean, I think it starts with centralizing the money with the CDL instead of forcing each team to make the decision on their own how they divvy up the cash for the open bracket. They need to have each team pay this is the challenger's fee for the year, what we're doing, and then have either CDL run it or outsource it to Esports Engine, and then that's how that goes down. It has to be organized in that way, or else it's never going to actually happen.
It's tough, man, because I think in an online world, the ability to run a system that we're all kind of dancing around is much easier logistically.
Yeah, I agree.
Because, in my mind, I think that we're getting to a point, when we separated the pros from everybody else, that was, okay, we can't let these pros play up against Joe Schmo every single weekend. That has to stop. We have to establish a pro league. I think over the last 2 years, we've started to get to the point where that's the same thing, but in the tier 2, especially now that we're going to be getting 30 former CDL pros into the challenger scene. I mean, that could include players in APAC, by the way. Like Lucas Shocks Dens might not have roster spots next year. If they go back to APAC, that region gets more competitive as well. So there's a lot that could potentially happen to boost up the scenes overall. And I don't think that the system that we've had in the last 2 years is going to be as functional going into next year. I think that it is possible to set up some sort of a league. And I think beyond that, you can expect your challengers players to no longer play tournaments every single week, but play league matches. I think the idea that they have to prepare, they have to come ready to go for 1 set or 2 sets on a week, I think that is a skill set more than just now we have to go through 2 days worth of tournament. That is a
Agreed.
big
Yeah.
difference, and I'm sure Cam, you can speak more about that as a coaching mind from the Connect 5 year of preparing wise. And I think Drill is still in chat as well. He could probably say the same, but you can't just go and prepare for a tournament. The amount of preparation that you could do, saying, "All right, I'm sitting here. I'm in charge of Team A. We play Team C and Team D this week." We can sit down and prepare for those squads. And that's, I think, a skill set that amateur players need to start working on if they want to get to a professional level.
No, I 100% agree. And I think it will keep players kind of more invested as well. When they go into a tournament, say on a Saturday, and they're playing against Jimmy and Sam from, top 120th seed, and they don't know how to shoot back, and they're winning 250 to 10, 6-0 and domination like 200 to 20. It is a waste of their time.
Right.
If I'm being honest, I don't know if you guys kind of think the same, but those first 3 rounds, especially at the start of the year when there was a lot more random kind of kids playing, it just wasn't worth their time. Them getting up at whatever time to play at 12 o'clock against these players who don't have thumbs.
It's early as well.
It's what?
Yeah.
It's early.
It's time, it's so time consuming. I don't even play and I know it's time consuming. I'm sitting there on streams at like 11 a.m. watching these guys get ready for their games.
Yeah. And Bids is shooting against ex-pro Sniper 99.
I've ref matches where it's 250 to 1 before at a hard point. Like it's literally useless to play for those guys early on,
Whereas, like you were saying, Shift, if they're playing in a league and they've got prepared to play against, do they know that every game they're playing is against a top 12 team in that region? They are going to be more prepared. They're going to be more invested in playing because they're playing against people that are actually going to be able to give them a challenge. And
it's really better practice.
And if every game is being able to be recorded, so coaches can go back and look at things, and I feel like there's just such a better structure we could have to the challenges to aid them learning
development,
side, but also being able for like the pro teams to be able to see this talent, which there is a lot of in all the regions. There's so much more that could be done. And I really like that league system thing.
And we see that, I think, especially with young talent that get brought up maybe sooner than they're ready because you don't know. Like Spart, perfect example. Atlanta FaZe Academy home series, him and Sibilance ran through everybody. Like individually, those two were absolutely insane. Salvation State, we were right next to me. We were both sitting there watching these guys like, holy shit. They had just turned 18 in February. The event was like 2 weeks later. They fried everybody. Spart gets picked up. He gets dominated. And I don't know, there's a lot of different reasons maybe why that have occurred, but we also saw the same thing with like Sibilance. When Atlanta FaZe Academy, when they went to online, they had a little bit of a downswing. Sib has to change his role because he's not fitted the meta perfectly. And still, I think there's something to be said. I love the kid. I think that Sib is going to be an incredible star. But I would love to see him play league matches, not tournaments. So we don't get these explosive moments where people in the chat are like, bro, why are you losing full? Like, regain. Like, he might not be. But you're playing a day and a half worth of tournament, and it gets really frustrating to get that far and then not have a good performance. I'm sure that there's some kind of competitive mindset that gets distraught when you're in the final moments of a tournament. You feel like you played your best COD 9 hours ago. That's tough. That's super, super tough. And I think that if Sib were given a chance to really break down and learn more, and not have to prepare or not have to perform 13 hours in a weekend, just prepare for 3, that could be a totally different thing for him. And I think as an individual and as a kid, he would grow astronomically because of it.
For sure. And like, not to mention you're playing best of 3s on LAN. You're not even playing best of 5s until the last 16 teams. So it's like, it's hard to like really see the improvement as a squad when you're playing best of 3s like that. And like, you're barely even playing Dom for the first day or 2, even like, until like the last like night of Saturday. You're not even playing a map 3 generally. So it's just like, it is a weird situation.
I also feel like these guys, especially for these long tournaments every weekend, they can get a bit burnt out, especially when they get to, especially say like the team that wins the winners bracket final, and then they waiting 3 or 4 hours for these 3 games and a losers bracket to go, and they're not warmed up, and then they've got they're suddenly playing in a grand final, and they're all burnt out from the whole weekend already. And
I don't know how you prepare for that. Honestly, because
that's why a lot of the times this year you'll see that teams either went to a second best of 5 or the team from losers won because
Yeah.
they were warmed up. They've played 5 hours already that day,
Yeah,
and they're just in the zone. Whereas the team coming from winners, they're just a bit like, oh shit, I've got to play again. Oh my god, and then they've got to like try and refocus within like 20 minutes.
Yeah,
maybe like
you can just prepare for that and be ready for 1 or 2 league games.
I could totally see it as a player, where you win that winner's final, and like you mentioned, you could be waiting 3-4 hours. It's an indiscriminate amount of time. You don't know how much time you're about to be sitting there.
Yeah.
And I as someone who played competitively, like I played baseball all the way until I was in my 20s, and you played at a high level and things like that, blah blah blah. But like if you had a doubleheader, like you feel guilty for not staying on the field and like getting reps in. But at the same point, you don't know when you're playing again, and part of you wants to go, make a meal and sit out and chill. But like, I could not imagine what a game day would look like on a Sunday where you have to play your winner's final. Hey, we won it. Congratulations. How do you prepare again for that grand finals that could be coming up in 3 hours or 4 hours? I don't know. I couldn't imagine what that preparation would look like.
Well, I mean, that was what happened.
You don't do a lot. Honestly, because you don't want to shoot bots for 3 hours.
Exactly.
You completely wear out your hands.
But you feel like you have to. Like, I'm sure at some point you feel like, well, I can't leave my setup. Like, I feel like I'm not invested at that. I don't know. I'm sure that's some.
But I always feel like you have to take a bit of a break because you can't just sit there kind of. I mean, I guess you could sit there and kind of watch. If you have the games a stream, per se, you could sit there and watch, I guess. But, there isn't a lot you can do. You can kind of shoot a few bots, play some CDL playlist or whatever, if we're talking strictly Modern Warfare here. But yeah, there isn't a lot. I think I remember one week I just sat in the TeamSpeak with the boys, and they were waiting in grand finals, and just sat there for about 3 hours.
That's wild.
Just literally doing nothing, just chatting, because, like I said, you can't do much.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think maybe slicing the tier, as it were. We're talking a tier 2 system, maybe slicing it down to a tier 2 and then a tier 3 system where you do separate out the top 12 teams in each region or whatever have you, and then have everyone else go at it in week number 1 of a 2K or some shit like that, right? I think that does solve a lot of problems. Solves a lot of problems from a player perspective. They don't feel the same burnout that we've been talking about. You can schedule a lot easier when you're only dealing with 16 teams in a tournament and such, and beyond that as well. Works super well from a broadcast perspective. You're not having to deal with all of these issues.
The follow-up problem is scheduling that.
Yeah, I mean that's a problem, right? Because of course you're not going to want to broadcast the early rounds of a 1K or 2K. I think it was a problem. A problem felt quite often with the open bracket last year, right? Was the a lot
250 to 0 and 6-0 was the first game I cast at Anaheim, dude.
How are you supposed to do that?
What do you say?
Exactly. How are you supposed to do that? So I definitely think there is a solution. I definitely do think it lies with separating out these top teams so they don't have to play these rubbish players. We'll say rubbish players.
I always enjoyed the league games, say in like the CWL, where they would go to the
Black Ops 3?
I'm talking strictly like last year in Black Ops 4,
right, okay.
where they would go and play the league games. I'm sure the players didn't really enjoy it massively, but when you have these 4 league games a day, and I think from a spectator standpoint, it was quite enjoyable to watch. I feel like for challenges, I feel like it would actually, like we're saying, it would benefit the players massively because they would learn a lot about kind of what the pro stuff is about.
And brand building. Like if you knew Singularity and War were playing on a Wednesday night at 8:30, like you can
so much you can do.
Wednesday night. I'm gonna tune in Wednesday night at 8:30 for this league match. That's gonna decide who makes the playoffs. Like I'm in. I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like that's where the potential of the league really lies, is that it allows the CDL to have weekly content that they can live stream Monday through Friday.
Yes, that is exactly so. Okay, so just to give a recap, we're all in favor of some sort of official league standpoint where you've got a top X amount of teams. Let's just okay. Let me preface this: if it's staying online next year. We're all in favor of a league's format in some fashion, whether it's regionalized or collective. And then you also are in favor of doing a league match system rather than a tournament system. We're all saying yes.
I think it'd be so much more enjoyable.
Please.
So from there, then you get into scheduling. And I'm so glad you brought this up. We could be in a world where we should and could have COD every single day of the week. You could do APAC on Mondays and Tuesdays. You could do EU on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and you could do NA on Wednesdays and Thursdays or Thursdays and Fridays, depending on what the weekend looks like. And with that, Brody, we go to your point of which Need to find a way to get regional broadcasts going. Get a team in Oceania ready to go. Get a team in Europe ready to go. Get a team in North America ready to go.
I will say this. Right. I can't speak for Oceania or Asia Pacific or whatever you want to call it, right? Because I literally am not entirely clued in at all to who is over there in terms of casting talent, right? I mean,
that's the thing. I'm sure there are people that want to get involved that have never had the opportunity because, like, they're players. They're in Australia. What's the chances? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, but one thing I will say particularly is something I used to do all the time back when I was in sixth form. I'm gonna get roasted for this probably. I used to love spending my free periods aligned perfectly with the APAC broadcast, and I watched that shit because I fucking loved Call of Duty.
I'd wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning to watch APAC on. Right? Absolutely.
But it's so fucking cool. And as you say, right, you have the talent. It is there. It exists. You know, I'm not going to blow my own horn, but I've been sitting here. I've been looking for a chance at casting challenges all year long, and it's only been North Americans doing it. And when those North Americans are casting Europeans, it doesn't work because I'd say,
come on, CDL.
70%
get them in there.
70% of casters in North American region just don't know what's happening in Europe and APAC, and why would they? Why would they bother? Because they've got so much research to do. I just think, you know, there are so many benefits to having a regional broadcast. And then, you know, as I'm sure everyone's gonna love me saying this, as Roper said in the chat earlier on, there are casters like Ton, like Bryce, who have been sitting
Ton
here,
and Bryce especially
should have been offered opportunities.
Yeah. Oh my,
they've got 8 years experience. You know, beyond them, there are other casters as well. I just think, you know, specifically relating to Europe and North America, there are people who are grinding their asses off every single day. They want it more than anybody. You know, I can sit here and name names. There is absolutely opportunities for people who want to cast challenges, who know what the fuck they're talking about, and they should be doing it.
I'm going to interject. It's not just casters. We're starting to see aspiring production specialists, aspiring analysts, aspiring observers. We're starting to see a lot of that. And I think if there was the opportunity, you could bring on aspiring people for, I mean, I'm not going to lie, you could pinch your pennies off a lot of those people that are just looking for a chance that would probably do relatively well.
Yeah, I mean, from a politics perspective,
I've heard some totals of how some elite casters have been paid for tier 2 events, and I'm sitting there asking for an eighth of what they were paid to cast for 3 hours, and I thought that I was being greedy. Like,
I can tell you for a fact, like, obviously, you know, I say this from a casting perspective. There's a lot of politics that goes on in casting. I will say that much.
It's all of esports. Like, even as a player, I'm sure it's the same way.
Yeah. You obviously have to have like a certain amount that you will charge for as a caster, because you can't go any lower than that. If not, you'll start to get hated by particular people for what we call undercutting. And that does happen quite a lot. I know cases of how that's happened in Call of Duty. So, you know, we'll see, but definitely for sure, I just think, you know, there are so many upsides to having a regional broadcast. And as you said, Alan, you know, you touched upon it, there are so many talented members of the community that I just think are not getting the opportunities. And they just be complete amazing assets to the Call of Duty League. I mean, I could sit here and list names forever.
I think the other side of it too, you know, outside of the idea of being able to bring coverage, you know, to the players, and then obviously that leads to opportunities for the people that are running that production and part of that broadcast. Now you're looking at all these organizations that we lost from Black Ops 4 to Modern Warfare that very well might want to invest into a Challengers team because, hey, guess what? I know I'm going to be on broadcast. I know that my team is going to be A, B, C, and D. And beyond that, I know for a fact that as a social media person, I can push those storylines. There are so many things that I think could eventually lead towards establishing itself. I think the biggest problem is the fact that you look at the numbers from Black Ops 4, you know, going into Modern Warfare from the open stream, 3,500, 5,000 people at most, right? That is not enough to run an independent Challenger stream. But I think the thing that is missed upon and the thing that could be improved upon is if you start to establish that these are the days of the week, the times, these are the matches that are going to be played. You trust that your content creators and your social media managers for the teams are going to be able to buy into, okay, I'm Team War, we're playing Singularity. You know, beyond that, you've got maybe United gets back involved. They're playing teams like maybe 100 Thieves. You know, they're going to push things like that if there is a world where those organizations are allowed to exist. But the other side of it is, you know, looking at this last year, even if United, let's say, wanted to buy into a Challengers team, how the hell do you do it? You know, North American rosters were changing every 3 days. I mean, it's too tough.
Roster periods and like how they used to do it in the previous seasons and even this season, where they have roster lock like periods, and
Yeah.
it'd be good
Right.
to have those periods for
Right.
not like a really long extended time, but like you said, if they had splits, if they had 2 or 3 splits, like sort of seasons, you know, for the first split, you can do it whatever you want up until the start of the year, and then you have to have it 5 days before the first league match starts. Everyone has to have their rosters locked, and then after the first season, say they have 2 weeks break. Again, so you say 5 days or 3 days or whatever before the first league game, you have to have your rosters locked. And then it's locked, or they say, okay, you can make one change throughout.
You have to keep a core 3, something like that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, agreed. I just think there's actually a really good opportunity here, as you know, to bring it back to the earlier point I made, where if you do then separate out your tier 2 teams, I'll relate it to Europe because obviously that's where I'm from. You do separate out your 12 top European teams, and then you make it so that those rosters cannot change in season, or you maybe have one roster change window where again you have to keep 3 out of the 5 players, and then any other team outside of those top 12 can change and consistently chop and change rosters
just in the
between
open.
each 1K and
do whatever,
2K.
have fun, do what you want.
Yeah, exactly. And then the storyline becomes, well, these teams outside the top 12, every 1K or 2K, they're attempting to be the one of those final 4 teams that gets to play the top 12 in the final 16 or whatever. And then it becomes a storyline of, well, what are these rosters going to form? What are they going to do to get to those top 12? There's just an insane amount of storylines that can come from a roster lock system like that. At the moment, I think specifically relating to North America, it has kind of shafted the scene in a way. I mean, it's kind of funny, right, Shift? You and I were speaking at the start of the year. I can't remember what it was on. I think it might have been on one of our sort of homegrown challenges broadcasts about just how stupid the North American scene actually looked in terms of they just couldn't get anything locked down, like at all, ever.
Look at your final teams. The end of the year, your final teams that did well are the 3 teams that stuck together: Triumph, Carnage, Atlanta FaZe Academy.
It's funny, that, isn't it? It's funny.
Who would have thought?
Yeah, not me.
No, I think that, so we're all kind of on the same page as far as how things like that function. The question would be, if there's a potential of running things offline next year, do you essentially sit there and say, let's just say that next year is going to be what this year is supposed to be. There's a home series every single time that there's a CDL event happening. Is it possible then to make the argument to challengers players that we were going to establish a league, we're going to put it into splits, you're going to play the majority of your league matches still online, but then you're going to have a couple of major events that do indeed happen on LAN and those home series. So for instance, let's say that you do have your 3 season splits. All 3 of those playoffs will be at a LAN event.
They need to be honest.
And then everything else is the open events still happen. The open event still happens as they normally would. You can still show up, you can still play. It'll still count as an open home series event, whatever you want. But the only thing would be that those challengers players would only play at those major events. Everything else would be online. Would that be an argument too hard to pitch to the challenger scene?
I think the best way for it to work is if you want to have a league for challengers that was integrated between the top teams between all 3 regions, you would have to have everyone kind of based in one region, and you'd have to house everyone. If you want to say you did in America, you'd have to have everyone housed for an extended period of time from EU and NA, from APAC. I almost think the best way to do it would be to have kind of maybe regional leagues.
Regional leagues, yeah.
And
regional leagues, and then you qualify for the LAN playoff.
Not even that. Then if you're in the league, you then are invited specifically to actual tournaments.
Certain majors, okay.
Every like month or every X amount of weeks or whatever, people would then be traveled in for an open event or like an actual LAN event.
Yes. Although I would be very careful because the further we go into this, the further you start to ask questions of, well, are we starting to fund these teams to these
That
events?
was where I was going to go.
There is and I will say this, I've had conversations with particular members of staff who have told me exactly how much this shit costs.
It
is super ridiculous.
Oh, it's absurd.
To be honest, I think as soon as you start to discuss this stuff, it's a whole nother dimension of, well, it costs X amount, and trust me, it's a shit ton of money to even transfer 16 teams to a global stage. Yeah,
So that's kind of where my thought process was going, is if you've got 3 regional leagues, you've got a major event coming up, do you have to have, because Contenders ran something like this, where there was an opening event, a mid-season event, and then they had the final event. The mid-season event was called this Gauntlet, and they took the top 2 from each of the Contenders regions to that LAN event. Do you do something like that then, to where you have your regular season league, by the end of the first split, your top 2 teams from each of those regions get flown, they will play at this Challengers event, and then you fill out the other 2 spots for an 8-team double elimination bracket with wild card spots. I don't know, maybe something like that. That's kind of the only way I think you could, because I don't think there's a world where you could expect 36 teams. Let's say that there is, 16 or 12 teams for each region. Can't really expect 36 teams to all get there for a Challengers LAN. You know what I mean?
But like the standard for me is 16, right? I mean, your standard is
standard like for a playoff 16 bracket or something.
Yeah, so say like just for the argument's sake here, that you have a 16-team North American League, you have a 12-team European League, and an 8-team APAC League. Okay. For argument's sake, you then would have a playoffs for each split, where the 8 North American teams, the 6 European teams, and the 2 North APAC teams fight it out in a sort of playoff bracket. Again, though, the problem there is you got to then fund 16 teams to one central location. You're funding 2 APAC teams, which costs a shit ton, because obviously, APAC is far away.
A problem.
There is a ton of problems that come with this sort of thing. And to be honest, I think the best way around it would be simply to regionalize even something like playoffs. It would suck. But I think if you are going to do a system like this, you have to think realistically from a financial perspective.
Yeah, I agree.
That even then, the playoffs need to be stuck to those regions up until the Challengers Championship, because I think it generates storylines as well, right?
I agree.
If you were to have these guys face off every few months or so against each other, it kind of it messes up the storylines, it messes up your hype. Like you then have questions going into the final event of the year. Like,
true. I mean, how much would I pay right now to see Renegades play?
Dude, I would pay
exactly.
bunch to see Renegades play on LAN versus everybody. Oh my god.
Yeah. You have them face off once at the start of the year and once at the end of the year. And then it creates this massive build-up of like, well, War is the best team in Europe. Renegades are the best team in APAC. Let's have them fight. And you wouldn't get that until the end of the year. It builds your hype. If the CDL market it correctly, it could be really, really good for the scene.
I agree.
I'm thinking 3 events then. Find a way to qualify teams for a launch weekend. Maybe the launch weekend is just still like the way it was in Minnesota. Everyone can participate if you want to.
Probably.
But I think you need a mid-season as well. Not just a finals. I think you need a mid-season too.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I could agree to that, yeah. But then again, that becomes another problem of you have to fund X teams to that event.
Yeah, but I think that the way that you do it, I wish like hell.
What if you run open bracket tournaments just like the CWL did in the past, where the teams that qualified for the LAN, then you host a major event where the open bracket happens, and then the pro league teams, which is the amateur teams that are in the league, qualify for their own pool play already.
I like that idea. That could work. The thing is, like, for me, it's like with these home series events, like we talked about before, open tournaments drive the audience. Like every single home series, you need to have an open event. It just comes down to at what point, if at all, do you integrate that second tier to also be at those home series? Whether it is by you go through the open bracket, okay, cool, you qualified, now you're in a group stage, but then you have matches going on at the same time as the CDL, and true. There's a lot of logistical things that get a little bit, everyone's going to have their opinion on. Like, number one, I don't want to have any other match going on during the CDL broadcast. Okay, fair. Yeah. Totally understandable. At the same point, though, is it more realistic to get teams that have to go through an open tournament to qualify to get into that second scene? Yeah, I think competitively that makes a lot of sense as well. So, yeah, there's a lot of things that are, I think that could be brought up conversationally.
Yeah. The logistics are just really tough.
It's wild.
When you're considering a LAN environment, it's so tough.
Yeah, if it's online, it's easier. I
think it probably will be online this year. So if it's just run as a kind of regional stuff, it obviously run a bit better. I actually think that would benefit in the long run if this year actually it would benefit if it's online, obviously, because everyone wants to play on LAN. But I actually feel like if they tried to integrate this kind of system into challenges, they could do it quite easily this year, like based on regions, and then next year try and integrate it with some kind of form of LAN events.
No,
Yeah,
That
I
would be
agree.
sick.
Yeah.
I mean, the best system that I thought, and I think Overwatch kind of killed itself in the contender scene by changing it, was the 18 to 19 season where you had teams that were academy teams. It was all regional based contender systems. And at the end of the season, if you were a top team from a region, you got invited to a major LAN event. It was the middle of the season and the end of the season, the gauntlet at the middle and then the finals at the end. And I think that system worked really, really well for Overwatch, and then they completely changed it, and it pretty much dismantled the entire tier 2 franchise idea, where you did no longer you had teams that were kind of investing into their academies as much. I mean, in that 18 to 19 years, when you found the Vancouver Titans picking up the best team from Korea, and they were able to prove themselves online, they proved themselves on LAN. You get picked up, you immediately go into the Overwatch League, and you get your team a second place finish your first year out. So I think that there's a lot to be learned from that, and I think that there is a way to integrate that into the culture that is amateur competitive COD.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think having a mid-season event and I'll say this: if we were to imagine a world where we get the perfect system and we don't have to consider the monetary sort of considerations of what these sort of things are going to cost, then yeah, for sure, having these regional leagues, having everybody face off in a mid-season event, a la stage 1 playoffs or stage 2 playoffs or whatever you want to call it, and then having a end of season Challengers Championships is sick. It's exactly what we want. It's exactly what we need. And then of course couple that regional broadcast, perfect.
Yeah.
Of course, the elephant in the room is the problem that these things cost a shit ton of money. Will they realistically happen? Probably not. So we just got to look at this from an online perspective of regional leagues. I think are the best thing we can hope for, and regional playoffs with the prize pool being distributed properly, and playoffs at the end of the season not having more teams than they need to have.
That's fair.
There should not be 32 teams at the end of the season playing for a prize pool, and the top 20 teams should not be getting a chunk of the prize pool. That's the bottom line.
But if they could do regional LANs, I mean,
regional LANs would be cool. I think the whole idea there is then is that going to be at the same time as a CDL event? Is that going to be an audience-driven thing that again we talked about before, or is it its own thing like when Paris they ran their own challenger-specific thing? I think that was super successful. So I
was going to bring that up earlier. Yeah, when we were talking about kind of did they want to have CDL challengers events or the challengers events alongside the CDL events? And they did. Obviously, they ran that Paris one, and obviously it was no spectators. Was there no spectators?
No, it was no spectators.
Yeah,
so obviously was allowed in,
but yeah, there was. I feel like but the problem with that is, do you think you could draft in a big enough crowd to come and watch?
Exactly.
I feel like in Europe, I think if you held them in like England, I think you could actually get a decent crowd of maybe 500 to 1,000 people potentially, because. Or is that maybe do you think that might be pushing it?
I don't know, man. I think it's you need to build it up.
It's one of those things that with the Challenger specific events, again, the audience is driven by being able to compete and then attend. So if it's just your 16 or 12 European teams, will those Challengers teams be expected to pull an audience if in the North American scene, we couldn't even get a good audience for CDL home series? During less attended contender or challengers home series that were coupled with it. So I think that is another logistical problem when it comes to running a regional LAN. I'd be interested to hear this from an Australian's perspective, because they do this all the time in Brisbane and Sydney with their Aussie LANs that they hold. I'd be interested to see what they have audience wise that attend those.
Well, you could just run it like CWL.
Different.
You could just run it like a CWL league match as well, where there was no crowd and it was just casters.
Right.
I mean, because they if the casters are good enough, they can still bring a good atmosphere to the stream.
Or the other is you put the LAN on top of another convention or event that's being ran. TwitchCon Europe, run it at the same time as TwitchCon Europe. Then you don't have to worry about that audience
if you're trying to run it as like the league. If you instead of having it as like online leagues, if you're having it run as like a LAN league, obviously that would be a bit different. But if you were trying to host actual LANs, then yeah, I mean, you could try and tie it in with something else.
Yeah, that's possible.
All right, let's run this down. Let's give the final thoughts here as we're approaching the 2-hour mark on the broadcast. I know we could talk, man. We could do on this forever. But I want to get our final thoughts just kind of through. We'll just go down the list. Infinity, kind of talking about all the things that you kind of want to leave the people with, you know, sentiments wise, whether it's something that you want to see in the future, something you hope is fixed from the last year, whatever, your time.
I'll be honest. So you brought me on this podcast to discuss everything from a broadcast perspective and a caster perspective. And bottom line is the broadcast at the moment needs to change. I'm very grateful for the challengers for bringing us a broadcast this year. That being said, I just think there are a number of issues that I think are very fixable. I think they know they're fixable. And in my mind, it's just a case of you need a regional broadcast. Pretty easy to do as long as the money is there for it. And you need casters that know what they're talking about. And that's the bottom line for me.
Fair enough. Salvation's elite, dude. Your time.
Man, I mean, going into next year, it's like I agree. We need to see the coverage. I mean, if we're gonna have guys like potentially like Decimate and Saints and Classic down in the scene again, we need to have eyes to watch them play because it's going to be a good product. And I mean, overall for the AM scene, I'm excited about it because it's going to be fun to watch. But for the guys that are there right now, it's a tough situation, and I just fully believe the most important thing right now is that the teams centralize the money that they have into the COD League, and then the COD League either, you know, lets Esports Engine run it or they run it themselves. But the funds need to be centralized because, like, right now with the teams, how they organize all the open bracket stuff, it makes no sense with all the teams having to do their own things with broadcast and everything. So that's kind of my biggest takeaway, and that hopefully that changes in the future where the CDL can kind of centralize the whole system.
Mr. Cam Allen, your time, brother.
I mean, they've kind of already touched on it, and I kind of touched on it when we started this, that it just literally just need more exposure for these guys, especially like you're saying now. It may seem a bit unfair, you know, if they try and broadcast more because some of these kind of pros may be playing in the challenges next year. So it might seem a little bit unfair to the guys that didn't get as much exposure this year, but kind of just, you move past that and you just try and show yourself for what you are as a player. And if there is more exposure to it next year and just try and, you know, build as much of a brand and a stock for yourself as you can. That's yeah, kind of touched on that earlier, but that's kind of my biggest takeaway is we just need more exposure, to be honest.
I feel you. I think we're all kind of in the same boat. I will say this much, and we haven't talked about either of these two people up until this point, but we're very lucky to have people like Zeb and Jack Felling that are behind the scenes when it comes to the challenger scene. They are very passionate people when it comes to trying to bring the best product possible as far as everything we've talked about. Competitive integrity for the players, organizational things from the logistics of the venue, all the way down to things like broadcast coverage and making sure that there is enough exposure. My biggest takeaway is I think going into next year, there really can't be a choice. I think it's pretty much determined now with 4v4 happening, no expansion teams, a league has to happen. And with that, it's going to have to be a regional league because everything's going to be online. And with a regional league with major names, it needs to bring forward a broadcast. Whatever happens past that, happens past that. But I don't think you can have players like Temp and Methods or Metals and Lucky and all these big players that very well could be the challenger scene. They can't be playing up against X capital X Sniper 512 capital X lowercase X _0. Like that can't happen.
In a 2K on a Saturday.
In a 2K on a Saturday at 9 o'clock in the morning. No, it definitely can't happen.
Way.
I think that, you know, especially hearing Temp stream earlier today, you know, with him potentially, you know, up until the very end where he was starting to get offers, where he was looking at the potential future of playing in challengers. He's going to want to play with other pros or former pros, I guess is the technical terminology we have to use. But that is not a group of 4 people that Temp plays with that cannot be afforded to be watched and put into a competitive system that allows them to find success, not just in the integrity of who they're playing up against, but also in the financial standpoint of what they're playing for. That's kind of my big takeaway for it. Good stuff, guys. It was fun.
Yeah.
Cool.
Cheers, man. Having me on. Appreciate
of course. It's my pleasure. This is one of those things that maybe we'll have to do more of, depending if the opportunity provides itself. But of course, if you're looking for more content, all of these guys around me do incredible content. All of their Twitter ads are right underneath their names, so make sure you give these guys some love on your way out. That's going to do it, though. Hope you guys enjoyed the elongated show, and if we do more like this, we'll be sure to let you guys know on the Twitter. And, of course, if you missed any of this show, I'll be posting the entire thing up on my YouTube, and I don't know if these guys are going to be taking snippets for their own, but I imagine if they do, they will also let you know on their Twitter and YouTube feeds accordingly. So long. That's all I got. Bye-bye.
It's been real.